Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I am super excited to have with me Max Strom. Welcome, Max.
Hello, Ben. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited you were able to make some time for me today.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm happy to be here.
Max, we were talking about the best way to describe you. I know you're a breathwork teacher, a yoga teacher. You're an author. You've written 2 books, and you run workshops around the country. What am I missing in describing who you are in a nutshell?
Well, I speak and lead workshops, retreats, and so on worldwide, Middle East, Europe, China, and I'm doing more and more speaking. I've done 3 Tedx talks, and I just spoke at a conference in Austria in Vienna a few days ago to a group of hoteliers who are suffering from burnout, which is one of the issues of our time. So I speak quite a bit on anxiety, depression, sleep dysfunction, and things like that.
All right. I think almost probably anybody listening can identify with that, since it seems to be a function of our time, or maybe they're common human things that have happened throughout history. Um, let's take a step back, though. I want to hear a little bit about your superhero origin story before we go into the work today. You weren't always a breath teacher, and I know you faced some adversity growing up. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's funny. Superhero origin story. I feel like I should say I was exposed to high doses of radiation or something like that.
It's how they all
I was
start.
born. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was born with clubbed feet. I was a very big baby. I was 12 pounds when I was born, but my feet were grossly misshapen. And so within a few days of my birth, they put my feet in plaster casts. So I basically was challenged by that the first 9 years of my life, where I had corrective surgeries, or I wore braces, or plaster casts, maybe 30 to 50% of each year. And my feet grew into quite different shapes. Ultimately, one is 3 inches longer than the other. One has no arch, the other has a high arch. But despite all this, I was able to be pretty active as a child and compete in sports in high school and so on. But it definitely taught me a lot about physical patience, pain, what it's like to be under enormous pain, and both how to deal with it and also how to, unfortunately, repress it. Um, and my household was somewhat like this as well. I grew up in a family where we didn't really understand how to express emotions in any kind of healthy way.
Right.
So negative emotions were basically suppressed by everybody, and this is the environment that I grew up in.
All right. So you had some good fuel to help tackle and learning how to transform later on.
Well, yeah, transforming became an imperative because I was trapped inside such a small box emotionally that I felt like I was going to explode much of the time as a teenager. And when I discovered at quite an early age qigong and meditation, which was around 16 with meditation, 18 with qigong, it made a world of difference for me.
So that, I guess, probably opened you up to understanding your breath and mind. How did that shift you?
Well, really, there were 2 stages. I would say that the meditation and the qigong were really imperatives to understand how to use my body in conjunction with my mind, and how to regulate my body. So, for example, if I had pain, extreme pain, I could decrease the pain by utilizing these breaths I learned in qigong. I could also achieve great states of calm and centeredness, but I didn't find that these practices changed me emotionally on a psychological level. I mean, this
Okay.
is in hindsight, of course.
Right.
Later, in my early 30s, I discovered hatha yoga and more extreme forms of breathing. And that is what triggered more psychological, emotional transformation, which was really utterly life-changing for me.
All right. So when you were in your 20s, were you in these healing arts at that point, or did you live a different life then?
Um, I was in those healing arts for a while, but it gradually fizzled out as I got into the performing arts.
Okay.
One of the ways I was dealing with trying to make sense of this world was I became a musician and ultimately professional musician. And that was a great form of self-expression for me. So I had a couple of records out in the early 80s. And when I was about 30 years old, I took a year off to write a screenplay, and that went pretty well. And I was pretty much starving as a musician. Although I achieved some modicum of fame, it's really hard to make any money in that business unless you are doing, it's like you're either doing really well or
Right.
you're not making any money at all, sort of like the 1% than everybody else. So I took a year off, wrote a screenplay that did pretty well. And so I was a screenwriter for about 8 years after that. It was during that time I started practicing hatha yoga and ultimately left the film business to become a teacher of hatha yoga and lead a very simple life.
And how did that practice of hatha yoga help you with the psychological portion of what you'd been repressing?
Well, I know this will sound perhaps odd to some of your listeners, especially men, but it turns out that our emotions are in our body, that we feel them there. I mean, if you just think about it, you know that you feel your emotions in your body. You can
Yep.
tell when someone's angry by looking at their body. Think about observing someone that you know well.
Right.
That person can walk in the room and you know that person's angry. They can
Definitely.
walk into the room, you can see if they're depressed or anxious about something by their body language without saying a word.
Right.
We express our emotions and experience them in the body. And once we think about it just for 2 minutes, we think, well, of course, that's true. But on top of that, and this is the part that's puzzles people sometimes, is we also store emotions in the body. Now, neurologists say this isn't true. We store them in the brain. That may be so. All sensations in the body ultimately are experienced in the brain. But if you break your leg, you feel it in your leg. You don't feel it in your brain.
Right.
Right. When you kiss someone on the mouth, you don't feel it in your brain. You feel it in your mouth. So regardless of ultimately where these triggers and impulses are going and coming from, we experience and store emotions in the body. And any good body worker can tell you this and validate this because they'll work on you in a particular area and then a lot of emotions start flooding out. People will start to weep or get angry or start talking about their past suddenly. And this sounded strange to me too, but once I started practicing hatha yoga, but more so when I breathed a certain way while I did it,
Right.
then at the end of every practice, I would feel emotions coming up, old emotions. And this went on for about a year. At the end of every practice, I would have some tears come from my eyes. I wouldn't be sobbing, but just, leaking saline solution from my face. And after about a year, it finished. And something else extraordinary happened at that time, which was people started telling me that I seemed like a much happier person,
Right.
not knowing that I was even doing these practices. They just said, you're changing. You seem more light. You smile a lot more. You don't ever seem anxious. I basically became a happier person, putting it simply, by doing these practices. And that's what intrigued me to teach to other people. And once I started doing that, of course, I saw the exact same process happening with other people.
All right. That's amazing. I know it's hard to get somebody from uninitiated into a regular deep yoga practice, and I know that's not necessarily your intention with everybody. How do you get
No.
people started on that path to go there? But what's that first step look like?
Well, the Buddha had an interesting way of dealing with it. If he was speaking to someone and the person said, well, I'm perfectly happy. I have a happy life. I'm healthy. I have no problems. He would say, well, then you don't really have any use for me. come and talk to me later, because at some point your life is going to go south. It always does, even if it's temporary. We have tragedies, we have crises in our life, and then we think, okay, now what do I do? Now I'm going through divorce and I feel like I want to jump off a bridge. Now what do I do? Or I just went bankrupt. I just lost everything, or my home just burned down, or my child died right in front of my eyes. Now what do I do? And this is when we become A, very interested in personal transformation, and B, very interested in breathing. You just watch anybody hurt themselves, they'll start self-regulating their breath, even if they don't know what they're doing. So what I tell people is, if you have anxiety, panic attacks, depression, I can help you with that.
Okay.
If you don't sleep well, I can help you with that without medication, and it doesn't take very much time. You can do it. I can make you feel better in 10 minutes by guiding you through exercises. So you're doing it to yourself, and they work every time. And the more stressed you are, the faster they work.
All right. And so obviously you see a lot of success with that. Is the breath enough for people, or does that lead them into kind of further inquiry into body work?
That's a really good question. Of course, I always recommend people get body work. I also recommend people go through therapy.
Right. The
trick with therapy is you have to find just the right therapist, and that can take some time. And a lot of people give up before they find one. And I understand that. But what happens is, think of it this way. What kind of things do you do if you feel lonely? You might, let's say, go to a bar to meet someone. Let's say I'm talking about someone that you're romantically interested in. You might go to a bar. You wouldn't ordinarily want to go to the bar and buy drinks and sit there with loud music playing. You're there because you're suffering in some way. Or what do you do if you feel anxiety and you don't want to feel anxiety? You might drink alcohol. You might smoke a lot of pot. You might, as a lot of people are now, become addicted to opioids, or play video games for hours, or binge watch TV. These actions are a way of not feeling our crises.
Right. Numbing ourselves.
So once the crises, or let's say the strong negative emotions that I've mentioned, once they are resolved or reconciled, as I like to say, you cease to want to do these things. So it appears as a healing. You don't want to do all these other things because you have no need to do them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's no pain that you're feeling to then bring in a numbing agent because you've resolved that.
Exactly. And so then once you realize that this has happened, it makes a person very interested in self-inquiry, like you mentioned, where, okay, there's a lot going on that I was never taught, and my friends don't seem to know about, but this definitely works. I feel differently now. I'm making different choices, even little choices. I'll eat that instead of that. I won't go there. I'll go there instead. I won't hang out with these people as much anymore because they make me feel very negative or trigger old habits. I'll hang out with these people because I feel better about myself and I make better choices when I'm with them. All these things accumulate to a new direction in your life, one little choice at a time, you see.
All right. That makes a lot of sense. And then, so, once you've had that initial realization, then, you'd hope that curiosity kicks in because you realize that you can probably get more of that good feeling.
It usually does, yes.
All right, cool. When you're talking to these hoteliers, for example, is the message almost as simple as that for the people experiencing burnout? Is there anything in addition to specific types of people, or is it a universal message and figuring out how to get it to them?
It's somewhat universal. I would say more toward the white-collar strata of society, which is the growing sector of society. I mean, there are so many people who work in a cubicle. You wouldn't call them blue-collar. Even if they don't make very much money, you'd still call them white-collar, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
So the message is basically universal. And part of my message is we are accepting a new way of life because of the digital information revolution that we're experiencing. And we're doing so extremely without wisdom.
Right.
There's no guidance, there's no leadership. So there's never been a time in history really that I can think of where companies just start manufacturing something and everybody thinks they're obligated to use it and change their entire life around it.
Right.
I mean, it made sense with AC, you know, when you live in a hot climate and it's almost unbearable in your house, and suddenly someone invents AC, air conditioning, and then of course you would want to use it. But now it's almost like people are getting air conditioning that they don't even need air conditioning. What I mean by that is the computer companies, whether they're making hardware or software, are not doing this for our well-being.
No.
They might be improving some of our abilities to work, process, efficiency, some of it, but a lot of it just eats our time, and our time and our lifespan are exactly the same thing. So they're eating our lifespan. And people in these companies, I won't mention any names, aren't sitting back thinking we should create an app to shut down people's phone after 8 hours so they don't use it because it's bad for them.
Right.
They don't create apps to warn you when you've been staring at a computer screen too long or shut down your video game. They aren't concerned with any of that. They want you to use their products. The government isn't doing it either, so who's going to do it? We have to be adults and make adult decisions and decide, I'm going to buy this app and use it in this way because it really does streamline my life. I'm going to use this app because it saves me time. I'm going to use this app because communicating with my family is easier. These, I'm not going to use. All
Right.
this does is serve the company that built them. Yeah? So if we don't do that, we're in serious trouble. And I want to tell you what I mean by that to your listeners. I want to give you some statistics. I've been lecturing about this particular issue since about 2005. At that time, in the United States, about 25% of people were taking antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs.
But it's a lot higher now.
50%. So at what point are we going to say we're in big trouble? I mean, we have all of these new things and we're getting unhappy or not happy.
Right.
If you go to a doctor and say, I don't know what else to do, can you give me a pill for this? That means you're out of choices, you're out of options. You're miserable, maybe suicidal or listless, or hopeless, and so you want to medicate it, which of course doesn't solve it, it only treats symptoms.
Right.
And now we're at half the population. To me, this is a crisis of epic proportions, and there's no app that's going to solve that problem. We have to live differently. One of the simplest ways we need to change is to go back to the 8-hour day. You know, the blue-collar society is well protected with this, but for some reason, white-collar is out of control, where managers will send emails, at 11 o'clock at night and expect them to be answered.
Right.
France is the first country that just passed a law to outlaw this. Once you leave the office, they can't contact you till you come back to work the next day. So go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've seen in workplaces that I've been in some of that changing because of that consciousness. Like people saying, if it's not an absolute emergency, don't send emails over the weekend. That'll raise somebody else's anxiety, and actively trying not to respond after you leave work. So totally agree with you. And I think in addition to that, just in terms of apps in general, I know with my wife and I, it's like I can't look at any social media before I've done my self-care for the morning, which is, meditation and exercise, and, try and keep that, away before I go to sleep. Otherwise, like the accumulated hours and, like you said, lifespan is pretty gross when you look at it in aggregate for what you get out of it.
That's right. And social media is one of the big culprits. And I'm not saying people shouldn't use social media, but like food, it's portion control.
Right.
If you're on it all day long, if you can't have an experience without sending it to your social media platform, it's really a serious addiction, and we have studies that have proven that it's an addiction that has a negative consequence, not a positive one. This has been well covered. So what I lecture about is that we need to decide how to use these new things to our benefit, to serve us, and not for us to serve the computer companies. We need family time where there's nothing on, there's no TV on, there's no computer on, and cell phones are down. Now, anybody can argue with me about this, but I want you to tell me why 50% of children have anxiety now. And that's the number, 50% of children, because their life hasn't changed that much. You know, they don't have an employer contacting them at 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
See what I mean? So a lot of what's affecting them is them being online in various ways.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're mirroring their parents' behavior. Their parents are paying less attention to them, so they're like, okay, this is where I need to focus my attention on this little digital device, and then
that's right.
Just get sucked into that same vortex.
Yes, I often say, don't be so concerned to save up for your college education for your kids. Save up for their therapy, because if you continue to stare at your phone and be on social media when you're at the park with your kid, your kid's memory of you is going to be of you staring at this thing in your hand all the time, and they're going to resent you for it.
Yep. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I can, it was before the age of apps, but I've got memories of, my dad watching the football game, and I'm like, come on, Dad, let's play. He's like, I'm watching the football game. So same, but different.
Exactly.
All
But
right.
this would be like watching the football game every day.
Yep.
Because people are on social media every day.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. So would you mind taking me through one of your simpler breath exercises along with the audience to show how easy it is to start getting in touch?
Yes. If you've never done a breathing exercise before, this is a really useful one. You can use it at work to de-stress, and B, you can use it at home at night to help you fall asleep. So if you have any problems falling asleep, you can do this in bed, lights off, under the covers, ready to go to sleep.
Okay.
It's extremely simple. I call it the 4-7-8 breath. This is a really old practice. I didn't invent it. Has several names. So I just call it 4-7-8. It's easy to remember.
Right.
So what this means is we'll inhale to the count of 4, then we'll hold our breath to the count of 7. Then we exhale to the count of 8. So it's an algorithm, basically. It's an algorithm of breathing. And this triggers your nervous system to shut off fight or flight and trigger on the relaxation response, which is natural to us. So I'm going to count in a way that most of your people will be comfortable with. But for those of you listening, if this is too slow for you, you can try it again at home and just make it a little faster.
Right.
So the tempo is what you change, not the numbers. You always do 4-7-8. You can. What I mean by that is, here's an example: 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2. You see, they're both 4, but the speed is entirely different. So you choose a speed that's comfortable for you later after this podcast. Now, when you breathe, you'll breathe into your lungs until they're absolutely full. Not a partial breath, but a totally full breath. I suggest you do this sitting up with a straight spine. If you're in a chair, take your back off the backrest. Your lungs will fill to a greater extent if you do it this way.
Okay.
Okay, so to prepare, quick exhale. Exhale everything. Okay, now to this speed, inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 4. 1, 2. Fill your lungs completely. 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale more. Now inhale 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe as you like. Just take a moment to notice how you feel now.
Feel good, man.
Yeah. And that takes only about 3 minutes. So we did 4 rounds.
Okay.
4, 7, 8, 4 times. So if someone's trying to sleep, fall asleep, 4 might work. You might have to do 8. You'll usually be asleep by 7 or 8.
And I know for me, falling asleep is generally not an issue, but it's like a wake up in the middle of the night type of thing. I assume the same difference?
Yes, you can do it then as well.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think what I like about that is it's simple. Anybody can do it. And then
Yes.
It also gives you a frame for if you're starting into the land of meditation, you have a base to go in it in terms of being able to focus on your breath, and doing the counting automatically takes you away from the monkey mind.
That's exactly right. And Ben, if I may, I'd like to take 30 seconds and just demonstrate a breath, because when people hear this, hear us talk about it, but they've never heard anybody control their breath before. It's like we're talking about this mysterious thing.
Right.
So I'd like to just take a long inhale so your audience can hear what I'm talking about, okay?
Okay.
So this will be one inhale. You'll hear a sound that's kind of like the ocean. So that was an inhale. It was maybe 15, 20 seconds long.
Right.
And once you get warmed up, you can, if you do this every day, you can elongate it to 30 to 60 seconds just on an inhale. And then, of course, the same length of time on the exhale. You do that a few times, you're calm. You just have to practice it every day. So I call that ocean breathing, because it makes that sound kind of similar to when you take off your glasses or sunglasses to fog them. It's you make the sound basically the same way.
Gotcha. Cool. What else have we not covered that's good for people to realize when they're starting to realize their own power to manage themselves and use that as a lever for evolution?
That's a good term, lever for evolution. I like that. I do call these evolutionary practices, because most people just let life happen to them and evolve according to circumstances. An evolutionary practice means you decide, you make choices that accelerate your evolution. Well, maybe we could touch base on men in particular in these practices. Okay. Yeah. That sometimes people will say things like men are not as in touch with their emotions, or know what emotions are, or are good at reading people's emotions, as if we're born that way. But that is really a false narrative, and we really do have the exact same abilities that women have, but it's knocked out of us at a really early age. The
Right.
good news is we can get it back again. I often mention that even if you have two parents who teach you how to have feelings and express them, once you get to the schoolyard, then you find out what's really socially acceptable and what isn't, because kids will tease you, mock you, beat you up, all of the above, if you express things like loneliness, fear, grief, shame. Your boys in particular are taught you cannot express these without being mocked and ridiculed. So usually between the ages of 6 years old and 12 years old, these things are beaten out of you. And by the
Right.
time you're 12, 13, 14, you cease to express those things. And people think, oh, it's because of testosterone. It's not. I mean, certainly aggressive behavior, competitive behavior, active and things like that. Yes, that's from testosterone. Sex drive, of course. But not being able to say, I'm lonely or I'm afraid or any of that, that's taught by society. And we pay a high price for it, because the thing is, we have studies now that show us that if we try to block certain emotions, our brain and our heart aren't so good at differentiating. So in other words, if you block these negative emotions, what we consider negative, we also block good emotions. So for example, if you think about maybe your dad or your granddad or an uncle, you might notice that the same dad or granddad who had trouble saying, well, let me put it another way. If they wouldn't express shame, loneliness, fear, grief,
Right.
they also had a hard time saying, I love you, I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry. They're often, they go hand in hand. They can't express love very well. Even if we know they love us, occasionally they give us a look, or they take good care of us, or occasionally praise our achievements. They have a really hard time just looking in the eye and saying, you have no idea how much I love you, things like that. Or I'm proud of you, because, you'll even hear them say, well, he knows. It's like, well, okay, what's the big secret? Why can't you say it? They can't. And so when we get into a marital situation or a significant other, we might have the exact same problems where we have great difficulty in expressing very positive emotions and showing love, and it scares us. And this is why a lot of times men have the so-called fear of commitment. It's not fear of commitment; it's fear of vulnerability.
Right.
Because
I
because we were
just
taught.
went to a restaurant with my wife where I first told her I love her, but that was after she drew it out of me because I'd taken too long to say it. So I was like, of course I love you, but
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I can relate it in my younger years to similar issues. People would say something very emotional to me, and I would have no facial response. It was like say anything to me. I had to teach myself to allow myself to do that. So my point is, in our society, we're still kind of being brought up to be Spartans. And if we're going to war, that sort of behavior is logical and can save your life and the life of your comrades. But in peacetime and family life, it is detrimental in every way to our emotional health.
right.
And this is why men die sooner. This is why more men kill themselves. This is why men are basically unhappier of the two genders, the two sexes, I should say.
That makes a lot of sense.
So one of the benefits you get from the breathing work, the reason I brought it up, is it is one of the solutions to this problem.
It's the gateway to figuring it all out.
Well, certainly to figuring out what's holding us back from living a really full life.
Right. All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time and sharing your wisdom with us. If people want to learn more about you and your teachings, what's the best way for them to find out more?
The best way is to go to my website, which is maxstrom.com, not Max Storm, which does sound like a superhero, Max Strom, STROM.com. And you can see where I'll be speaking or leading workshops for the next year in advance. And quite a comprehensive website. Also, if you want to hear some of my talks, you can go to YouTube and hear them there for free. And my books and DVDs are on Amazon.
All right. Great. Well, really appreciate your time, wisdom, and I know the audience will get so much out of this. So really appreciate it, Max.
Thank you for your kind hospitality and your interest in my work. I appreciate it.